rows back, little third grader raised her hand. She says, I know that a whale swallowed a man. His name was Jonah. Teacher says, I know, sweetheart. There are all kinds of stories out there. She says, I'm just here to tell you, science tells us, and this is our science lesson, that the whale has a very small throat. Undaunted little girl says, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jonah, was he swallowed by a whale? Now the teacher knows she has some struggle on her hands, right? Third grader. And so she thought, well, I'm going to win this argument. So as the teacher said to the little girl, she said, well, what if Jonah didn't go to heaven, but went to hell? The little girl shot right back. She says, well, then you ask her. Funny story until it happens to you or someone you love. In the hallway of the church, somewhere at camp meeting, somewhere at a conference like this, somebody sets you straight. Is sure how God operates, is sure how God wants your life to be led, is just sure of the do's and don'ts, and sets you straight. Research that we've done indicates that the primary reason why people leave the church is for relational reasons, and it's a breakdown in the relationships that prompts them to go. Oh, there are a variety of, far and away, the highest percentage of people who leave is because there was a rift in the relationship. And they are going. So, why do the people we love leave the church we love? That's why you're here this morning. And as you look at this list here, you're going to see that there are now layer upon layer of generations that we have in the Seventh-day Adventist church. We have a lot of people who grew up in legalistic homes. The rules, the lists of rules were long. They could never measure up. The way that the parents controlled the household is God. And you were told, look, if you're out of line, you know where you're going. Legalistic homes. You know people like that? What I would invite you to do in our time together, not only this morning, this afternoon, and tomorrow, is start to put together a list. God's going to prompt you with names of people. Just write them down somewhere, okay? Hopefully you have some extra paper, some place that you can start writing the names. Because God's going to bring those names to you on purpose, for a reason. So just jot them down. Now, if you're anything like me, you're going to say to yourself, oh, I'll remember those names. And by tomorrow morning, you're going to say, there was a name of somebody that I remembered yesterday morning, and it's not coming to me. Now, God's gracious and not going to say, too late, I gave you that name, and if you forgot it, that's it. God will bring it back. But why not be a good steward of the opportunity and just write down those names as they come to you? Legalistic homes. Well then, there are a number of people that grew up in homes where mom and dad divorced, and this has influenced their relationship with the church. You know people like that, right? No, the slides are not in there to answer the question. That's extra reading material, all right? Additional items that you see there in the Reconnecting Guide. So, if you will, whatever notes you want, just jot them down, all right? When the divorce happened, it often involves some connection to church, and this becomes a point at which they slip away. There are a number of people who went to academies that were very arbitrary. The rules were more important than the relationships.
especially our boarding academies, we have so many stories of people who said, when I got my diploma, that was it for me. Arbitrary academies. Now, I know your academy here in this conference wasn't that way. I'm just talking about some others, because I get to travel, right? There are many who got sucked into that whole cycle of addictions. And there are many of those. Yep. This has prompted them to kind of slip away from the church. There are many that got into their own ruined relationships themselves. Living with somebody, married to somebody, whatever the case, and it just kind of fell apart. And they were embarrassed, or somebody at church said something, or whatever the case, and they slipped away. And then there are plenty of people that went to church and it was a critical congregation. I know yours is a good congregation. Everything's fine there. I'm just telling you there are lots of critical congregations. So, this prompts people to leave. There are lots of folk without hope. Without hope. Now, we have a choice. We can look at those folk and we can say, well, yeah, they're spiritually lazy. I mean, if they had read their Bibles more, if they had read more of the good Adventist literature that we have, if they had really studied, if they had been more vigorous in what they had done, if they had done all these things, they wouldn't have left. Or we can say, well, they were intellectually liberal. They started reading stuff they shouldn't have. And started going here and there, and they just thought their way out of the church. And we can criticize them for being too intellectually liberal. Or we can say, well, we know the choices they made, and we know that they made choices they shouldn't have with their bodies. And if they hadn't gotten themselves in that place, then they would still be here. Am I stepping on too many toes? Or we can say, yep, they were relationally lenient. They just chose the wrong friends. And we could do that and probably be justified in doing that. And we've had plenty of people in the Adventist church who do that. And what happens is, when you point the finger, you can easily kind of say, well, that's their problem. But then I think the Holy Spirit prompts our minds and hearts to say, but these are brothers and sisters of ours. These are nieces and nephews of ours. These are people we went to academy with. These are people we went to college with. These are people we've worked with. These are people who went to our church. We know them. Why would we let them go? And so it comes really down to, I think, two quotations worth pondering. I don't know about you, but this first one really is true for me. People are on their best behavior when they know how much they're really loved. When I'm criticized, when I'm put in a corner, I want to fight. Or I want to flee, right? But when I know I'm really loved, I'm on my best behavior. I rise to the opportunities that are there, the belief in who I am, the confidence and the respect that people have in me. Oh, I know I'm not due that. I know where I am and that I need to make improvement. But when they love me for who I am and the potential they see God has in me, I stand up straighter. I'm guessing you're that way too. And then People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Oh yeah, it's an old saying.
That's really true.
But isn't it true? They don't care how much you know until they know and feel confident in how much you care. So there are many times when people will say to those who slip away, well, don't you believe the message? And they might tell you no, but deep down in their heart, an Adventist is always an Adventist. It's down deep in the DNA of someone. They've not really given up the message. Oh, they might want to tweak it a bit. We're going to talk about that a little later. But they're really trying to find out, how much do you care? And when you demonstrate that in their lives, then you can go to what the message is. So, I would invite you, my friends, to walk in their shoes for a little while. Just walk in the shoes of someone who's been away from church. And what I want to do in our remaining time here together is just point out to you a number of things we've observed now through the years and some of the studies that we've done that really gives us lots of clues as to why people left. Why did they leave? And if we walk in their shoes for a while, my guess is we'll have a much greater understanding. You ready to go on that journey? Okay. All right. Now, there's plenty of water over here just in case you didn't get any. You might want some. I'm going to want some, but I'm talking, you understand. So if you need to get up or ask somebody to get you a water, we'll surely understand that. Fair enough?
What were those other 2 points? Physical. One said we have a choice. Physically loose.
Yes.
And what was the other last?
It's right there on the screen.
Relation.
Lenient.
Oh, that's based on some.
I don't know about you, but as you look around your congregation, do you notice that there are 4 kinds of personalities? There's the persevering personality. The door of the church is open. That member is there. If there's a time in which the church treasurer took off with some of the church money, they still put money in the church offering plate the next Sabbath, confident that everything will be fine. You know these kind of people? When there's a fist fight at the board meeting because people can't come to terms with words, and some of you are laughing. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago in an Adventist church at the board meeting, a fist fight. What? Yes. They couldn't negotiate, and so they just started hitting each other.
That makes it worse.
The persevering personality will say, I'll go to the next board meeting. Don't you love the persevering personality? That's us, friends. Here we are Sabbath morning. We could be a variety of places, but here we are. And I think what you ought to do is congratulate each other. Just reach out and pat the back of the person next to you. Shake the hand, whatever you want to do there. Congratulations, persevering personality. Yeah.
We're in this together.
Yeah.
Together in collaboration.
There were-
I learned after the last conference.
Now, several of you did that, and then you started looking at me like, Paul, you're setting us up, aren't you? Yes, I am. Because you're not the only ones in the church. You're not the only ones in the church. Are you interested in the other 3 personalities?
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's the artist. We need all of them. There's my punchline. Thank you. We need all of us here, don't we? The artist. Now, you know people like this, right? They're good at thinking about the color schemes and making sure it all fits together beautifully. They love the art pieces. They are musicians. They bring the beautiful flower arrangements. They write music and poetry for us. Don't we love these folk? But when the money gets taken and the fistfights happen and all kinds of other things take place, the artists will go, yeah, you guys work that out. And while you do, I'm going to step away. You get the idea? Because they say, I'm not a fighter. And they see what we're doing and struggling with each other's persevering personalities as fighting. And they don't want that. And so they'll slip away, the artists. You thinking of some artists? Write their names down. They're the promoters. The promoters have the latest information, and they tell you all about it. Right? You want a promoter involved in anything that you're going to do because they go, you got to be there. Well, this and this and that and the other things happening. They're going to have a giveaway, and I hear it's a new piece of technology. Let me tell you about that technology. It has these features, and on they go. You know a promoter? And you love these folk, and they rev things up for you. But when the trouble happens and the struggle over theology takes place, the money gets taken, the fistfights happen, you name it, the promoter will slip away and say, it's not as fun around here as it used to be. Not as fun. And they'll slip away. Then there's the questioner. This is the person who's driving at the meaning of why we're doing what we're doing, is always looking for how can we improve and maximize what's taking place. I know we've done it this way for 150 years in the Adventist Church. Might we consider, they would say, that we would make some adjustments? It's 2013 after all, they might say. They want to drive at the relevance. They're going to ask questions. They're going to ask hard questions. They're going to ask searching questions. They want us to really think about what is important. So, do you know questioners in your church? Of course, the point you just made is we all need each other, friends. This is the church, not just the ones who stay around. I call it the invisible church. It's like a family gathering. Just because Uncle so-and-so or some of the cousins don't show up doesn't mean they're not part of the family, right? We know their stories, and there are a variety of reasons why they don't show up, but they influence the family whether we want to acknowledge it or not. Exactly right, if they're there or not. These three personalities are influencing our churches more than we realize because they know what's happening in our churches. And they're your best or your worst promotion in the community. They're talking with each other and they're saying, no, hasn't changed over there. Or, there's a new pastor, a few people died, a few people moved away, things are different. We need each other, friends. We need each other. Now, this is an oversimplification of the personalities in our church. There's more than this. But I think it makes a sharp point, doesn't it? We need each other. Well, it's our best guess. We're right now in the middle of some research that will give us more hard numbers. Worldwide, how many people have left the Adventist Church? I think it's going to stagger us. I'll get to the numbers in just a second. I think it's going to stagger us when we see what is really true. So get yourselves ready. Later this year, I think we'll have that data. But here's our best guess. There are 1 million inactive Adventists in the North American division of the Adventist Church. That's the United States, Canada, the island of Bermuda to the east, and the islands of Hawaii, Guam, and Micronesia to the west. That's the North American division of the Adventist Church, just to name the countries. So picture that. 1 million inactive Adventists. Now, some of you are statisticians, and you're going to say, you know, it was just 2 years ago in the Adventist Review that it was indicated we had 1 million Adventists in the North American division. So how can we have 1 million inactive Adventists? Well, the numbers are up there for you to see. Since the 1950s, when we started counting how many people were dropped from membership, their choice, our choice, 350,000 or so. That's huge, right? That leaves 650,000 to make 1 million. These folks still have membership in one of our churches. Still are part of the family. I don't know if you notice in your church, but not everybody who's a member attends, right? We're noticing that about 40% of membership actually attends one time a month. That's 12 times a year. So this gives you perspective and hopefully gives you pause when you see these numbers. This is a pretty good guess of where we are. I'm afraid it's going to get just a little more challenging when we see some real numbers. That means, friends, that you have tens of thousands in your conference that aren't actively attending church. There's huge potential here, right? Huge potential. Lest we get discouraged about it, let's just say, God help us. It's bigger than us. It's a God-shaped challenge, and so here we are, we're ready to help. But you're going to have to lead this because it's bigger than any of us can handle. There are anxiety-provoking events that cause people to go, to leave our churches. There are 4 of them. I'll unpack them here in just a moment. But this comes out of good research that's now been replicated several times. And really, this is pretty definitive as it relates to how people go. The first is reality anxiety. You could take a video camera like we have here, and you could videotape what takes place. You can videotape the experience that someone gets up the courage to come back to church, walks in, as walking past the drinking fountain decides, I'm going to get a drink, and gets a drink of water, and when he stands up, somebody says, well, it must be the end of the world to bring you back. What are you doing here? True story. What a welcome back. It's something you could videotape. Something happens. The fist fight, if you had a camera there, you could take a shot of that. There are more and more of these experiences, and we could just discourage ourselves to the depths of despair hearing these stories. I'll save you that grief. I might throw one in now and then just to give you perspective, but reality anxiety is something you could videotape. It really happens. Relational rift takes place. The next area is moral anxiety. Here's the classic example of moral anxiety. Let's cut right to the chase. Church A, pastor has a moral fall. Is asked to leave, no longer has employment in the Adventist church, has to find new employment, doesn't have membership anymore. Church B, pastor has a moral fall. But it just so happens that he's a golfing buddy of the conference president. So quietly, he gets moved to a church in Wyoming. Still keeps his job, still has his membership. And when members get wind of this, they say, ooh, wait a minute. Is that the way it should be happening in the church? Similar circumstances, uneven justice. Now, put in any story you want there. Moral anxiety rises in the hearts of people who see and hear this, and they say, I'm not so sure that this is what should be happening in the church. And this prompts them to just loosen their connections. The third area is neurotic anxiety. Now, some of us don't like that word, neurotic anxiety. We start to twitch. Oh, we're a little uncomfortable with that. Well, then, substitute it for imagined anxiety. Imagined anxiety. Here's the classic example. You go into the hospital. You're going to be there for 3 days. Now, it's going to be amazing that you're there for 3 days. These days, they'll give you a heart transplant and you go home the same day. Not exactly, but I'm exaggerating to make the point. You get the idea. You really only stay in the hospital a short amount of time, right? So if you're there 3 days, that's an amazing reason that you're supposed to stay by. There you are. First day, it's understood that the pastor doesn't come by because you went through your procedure and now you're kind of recovering and you're going to be there that day. And so you understand the pastor didn't come by. But the second day, the pastor doesn't show up again. And after a while, you're there in that hospital bed and you say, I knew it. The pastor knows I'm in here. That pastor doesn't like me. And when I get out of this hospital, I'm never going back to his church. You know somebody like that? Imagined anxiety, because the pastor doesn't know you're in that hospital. If the family members don't let them know, or if you don't let somebody at the church know, gone are the days your pastor can call up and say, are any of my church members in there? HIPAA rules, they're going to go, we're not telling you anything. Even if you are a person of the cloth, right? So, they don't know you're in the hospital, but that doesn't change your view. And you say, I'm not going back to that church ever again. Imagined anxiety. But it's real in the life of somebody. Existential anxiety. Existential anxiety is loss of meaning. When you hear somebody say, I used to like to go to that church, and it was really a great experience, but I'm bored now with that worship service. It's loss of meaning. And they say, I used to like to hang around Adventists, but they're not my kind of people anymore. Loss of meaning. These are 4 main categories that represent why people leave. Anxiety-provoking events bubble up in the lives of people. And it prompts them to start the separation. It's ever so gradual. There are very few people who make an abrupt change in their church attendance. For the most part, it's, I just need a couple of weeks off. I got to get my stuff together. When that's done, I'll go back. And 2 weeks turned into 2 months. And 2 months turns into 2 years. And 2 years turns into 2 decades before they know it. And I've talked to a lot of people who have said, well, it wasn't that long ago that I was at church. And so I love to unpack that with them. I say, so can you remember the year it was when you really kind of started to slip away? Well, I guess it was back when my kids were 3 and 4. They'll connect it to a person or an event or something, and they'll try to figure out the year, and before they realize it, go, well, my kids are 23 now. You know? or whatever example it might be. But they're surprised. There is a predictable track that people take. It starts with anxiety-provoking events. And now you know some of the main categories, and you know there's a relational reason why people leave. Now, what's really true is that it's often not one of those categories, it's several layered on top of each other. It's what I call the perfect storm. That rogue wave hits, and the wind comes up before you know it, and they're just kind of turned all about, and the waves are going up and down, and they're overwhelmed. Anxiety-provoking events. And what they hope is that their church family recognizes their experience. I won't forget him. Middle-aged man. We met and sat down at a restaurant table, and we had a good conversation. And it was an enjoyable dialogue back and forth. He told me about his work in healthcare and how he really enjoyed that, and it was going well. This had been an appointment that had been set up for us by the church. As I went into the area, I said, would you just give me the opportunity to speak to a few people who you haven't seen in church for a while? I'd like to interview them. So he told me about his experience there. Well, it came the moment in the conversation, you know how this happens, when he knew why we were together, I knew why we were together, and I needed to get about it. And so what I did was I asked him this question. You may want to write down this question. I think it might come in handy for you. I said, tell me, what was it like for you growing up Adventist? The majority of people who have left the Adventist church grew up in the church. We think it's people who came to an evangelistic meeting and the conference evangelists didn't do a good enough job to really root them well in the church. And so they washed out pretty fast, and we'd love to criticize that process. But the majority of people who leave the church grew up in the church. Went to the Adventist elementary school, went to the Adventist academy, went to the Adventist college. But now we're no longer there. Well, the man said to me, when I asked him that question, he said, I grew up in the church. He says, I understand all the theology of the Adventist church. He says, anybody like to ask me about that? He says, I'd be an effective apologist, one who would answer anybody's questions about the Adventist theology. I said, oh, interesting. He said, I understand all the standards of the Adventist church. He said, now mind you, I'm not keeping all those standards, but I understand what we do and what we don't. And he said, I'd be happy to be on a debating team and talk about the benefits of why we don't do this and why we do something else. I thought this was curious how he is answering me in this way. He said, I understand all the stories of the Adventist church, how it got started, and what the fabric of the Adventist family is. He says, I understand all the early stories. Now I'm really curious. Why is he saying this to me? Aren't you wondering? He said, you see, my great-great-grandparents were James and Ellen White. Now you had my attention. It prompted my second question. A question I think you may want to write down. Remember, what was it like for you growing up in the Adventist church? People will give you all kinds of experiences and stories, and you can get an idea about the early years and the good times. And then it comes to the second question. And I said to him, wow, so what was happening for you when you started to step away from the Adventist church? Because there is that story. If they're away, there are a set of circumstances. You now know anxiety-provoking events take place. These are often the major prompts. You know it's a relational rift, right? That's caused somebody to start stepping away. You know it's personality related, like we talk about. You know that there are a number of reasons why, and so you want to get at that, and you want to hear it by hearing their story. Well, the man said, I came home in the middle of the day one day, and I walked into the kitchen, and there on the kitchen counter were a stack of papers, and on the top was a handwritten note on a piece of paper in my wife's handwriting. And it said, just sign these divorce papers, don't contact me. And he put his head down as I visited with him. And he said, it wasn't that I didn't know we were having some challenges. He said, it just caught me off guard. I didn't know it was this serious. He said, in that moment, my world blew apart. And I was devastated. And he said, I wanted, and he started to really get animated. He says, I wanted the church that my family helped to start to be with me in my darkest hour. And he says, I've gotten 2 phone calls in the last 3 years from that church. And mostly it's, you used to be a leader around here, and you're not doing your job by not being here. You're letting us down. What's the message he heard? They don't care. He said, I wanted them to be with me in my darkest hour.
It's not even that. Not even they don't care. It's personal love.
And he wanted to be loved. He really did. What they want is for someone to notice. That's the second point here of the dropout track. Someone to care, someone to come alongside and say, it's our read, we don't know everything, and we don't have to know everything, but it's our observation that you're really in a difficult time. Is there anything we can do? Because we're your spiritual family. What can we do? And they often say, well, nothing. I'm okay. I'll be all right. And you can reassure them that we'll be here when you're ready. Just know we're praying for you. And then don't always take the first answer as the final answer. Just keep up that kind of gentle love, respect, connection. That's what people want. They want the pastor, someone who they know, they've seen leading out in the church, somebody they recognize as someone who says, is there anything we can do? Because we're here for you, after all. If someone doesn't do that, then what happens next is they will start to attend less, fully expecting a contact. Now, this is part of the surprising part of the research. Most times, we respond, well, they want some time. They need some space. And so we back away. When really what we need to do is gently draw close and even closer and not be intrusive and not point out the faults. We just need to say, is there anything we can do to help kind of lift you up? Help you out. The research says that when this happens, they're really kind of waving that flag to say, help, I'm going down in this perfect storm. It's like several years ago, we heard of this flash flood that came through a campground in Arkansas. Do you remember hearing about this? In the middle of the night, campers were there in that camp area. They're having a wonderful time, but there was a flash flood that came through in the middle of the night. It washed people away. And in the reporting, A woman said, I can't get it out of my head. A kid who's shouting out, help me, help me. And she said, I tried to reach, I tried to move, and she said, I just came to the place where I realized my life would be taken, and I couldn't find him in the dark. And his voice haunts me. That's what these folks need. Somebody to help pay attention, because they're going to attend less. What they're hoping is we'll notice and that we'll care. Once again, the progression then gets deeper, and what they do is they resign a position that they might already have, or they'll decline taking a new one, some leadership, some opportunity to be a volunteer in the church. Now, don't mistake this for some people who now are getting healthy in the boundaries that they have. They maybe have too much. We're asking too much of them. But when somebody declines a church role or they don't take a new one, just pay attention. Draw a little closer and see, is this a sign where they're saying, help? You'll know the difference. If someone doesn't notice, this is the point at which they get pretty angry. And like the man I told you about, whose family members were the whites that helped start the Adventist church, you get pretty angry because you say to yourself, how could they let me go? Without even checking, without even noticing, without even doing anything to help. I think that Adventist historians and others will look at the Adventist church and see the era between the 1950s and the present day and start to ask themselves this question: why would a denomination so willingly let so many people go? As if they are expendable. Our youth leaders are saying this. They're saying, why would we let so many of our young people go? And it doesn't happen in large numbers or we would notice. It just happens one person at a time. So we pay attention to it. Well, people get pretty angry, and they live with that anger for a while, but they come to the place, and the next step here is where they realize, I have got to come to some peace with this, or it's going to eat me up. It's going to ruin my health. It's not working with the people in my life. It's affecting my career, whatever the case may be. So they start rationalizing. They say, oh, well, of course. When they were building the new sanctuary in the church, and they were having a huge fight over the color of the carpet, they didn't notice that I just slipped out that side door. Or they were fully engaged in an investigation when the church treasurer took off with the money, and they just didn't notice that I slipped out. Well, there was that time when Pastor A left. It took the conference about 9 months to 12 months to find somebody new before Pastor B came. And everybody was all hands on deck, and they just didn't notice that I slipped out the door and left. They have to rationalize this. They have to get to the place where they say, well, of course it makes sense now. Although deep down in their hearts, they've got that gnawing feeling that's still there, and that thought, how could they so willingly let me go? And the last step in the research shows that they reinvest in another voluntary organization. They used to volunteer with us. Now they're volunteering somewhere else. If you would excuse yourself for one Sabbath, on a Sabbath morning, and you'd go down to, let's say, a blood drive that's happening in the community, or a fun run, or you'd go over to the Humane Society and see those that volunteer with all the little dogs and cats and other animals that have been surrendered. If you would go to other voluntary organizations on a Sabbath morning, my guess is you would find a number of inactive Adventists who are volunteering there. They want to contribute somewhere. They want to fit in and stand out somewhere. They used to in our congregations. Now they want to in some other place. They reinvest in another voluntary organization. Is this giving you some insights at all to why people leave? And maybe giving you an opportunity to write down some names. There are also some life events that cause people to go and trigger them to be on their way.
Well, the director, she said, yeah, that some of them are.
They came up to spend the weekend. They're staying in a motel in town. They don't want to be too overbearing with the kids there, but they love to come. And then, of course, they're going to take their kids home on Sunday. But they came to spend the Sabbath there. But she said to me, the director there of the camp, she said, the majority of people don't have kids who are in this week's camp. I said, oh, really? No, she said, these are people who drive for miles around to come to church here. I said, oh, they've just taken a weekend to get away from their home church. She said, oh, no, they don't go to church there. They just came here because, she said, we often see them at least once a month, if not more, at this church during the summer. And they report to us, this is church for us. We're still connected. Isn't that something? And I said to her, because her husband's the ranger and she's the director, and I said, do you guys plan for this? Oh, yes, we do. They said, we plan extra food. We plan for them to be here, to be part of the activity. Because they said, if they're going to come anywhere, we're happy to have them here. I think of that in this setting. And people come to camp meetings, they come to alumni gatherings, they come to camps, and they connect. Folks, we got to get better at counting that as a connection to the church. We want them in the pew every week, and wouldn't that be ideal? But when we ding them for not doing that, but still they connect in these kinds of places, I think we're short-sighted. If you see that people on average are only coming to church, you saw the statistics earlier, about one Sabbath a month, that's to the home church. Let's count it that they're coming to any of these activities and not count them as inactive. It's a mindset that we've got to change. Camps are just as much the outreach to adults as they are to children. And both are important. Both are important. Yes?
My son isn't going to church, but recently moved back to Washington. And I said to him, because his daughter likes horses and she'll be 60
Yes.
a month or so, I says, would you consider letting your daughter come to Sunset Lake for the horse camp? He says, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. No resistance.
No.
Yeah. Just look for those opportunities. But the additional step, let me just keep bringing it home, is we've got to change our attitude that they are disconnected.
Yeah.
We have an expectation we've got to change. Well, there are a variety of reasons why people go, and let me launch into that.
Communication skills, how you talk to a person with the scenes going.
Yeah,
How you open.
we're going to do some of that, but most of that is in your handouts. Okay? We're going to get to some of that, but I'm dropping these hints all along the way. I hope you're picking them up. There isn't a formula for how you work with someone, and it works with every person all the time. It's things you ask. Maybe it's sometimes things you say, but mostly it's when you don't even talk. But you use your ears and you listen. And you take time to be with people. And you're a non-anxious presence because you let God hold the timetable when somebody reconnects. This afternoon sessions, we're going to get into some specifics. Just you've asked a good question. I'm not dodging it. I'm just saying it's tailor-made to each person, right? Because we're all fearfully and wonderfully made, and we're all unique. We've got to find the way to relate to somebody, and relate to them well. But I'm really setting the table for you of why people go, why they leave. Because in these hints and prompts, I think are embedded the beginnings of solutions for how to really make the connection and make it well. There are reasons why people leave, and they are these leaving triggers. Now, here starts progression of a number of the times of life, the experiences of life that prompt people to go. I've given you some of the data. I've given you some of the research and the results of it. And also the stories of people who have left. One of the times, if you notice this, when people leave, is when they leave school, they leave church. You seen this? Oh, it's really easy to want to criticize the school. If they were only do their job right, raising these kids like they should, training them like they should, they wouldn't leave the church. They'd come back to our congregations and do what they should. It's the educator's fault. And it's really easy to do that. I think our educators are doing a great job. Oh, they're not perfect, but who among us is? So they're doing as best they can with the resources they have available, the limitations on staffing and all those sorts of things. They're doing all they can. Let's support them. It is church school, after all. Right? Don't just kind of let them go and do their thing. We're a team in helping to make this happen. But we're noticing that our young people are leaving the church when they leave school. Now, think of it practically for just a few moments. Around our Adventist education organizations and entities are our largest churches. You've heard of mega churches, and a lot of people want to criticize those. It really comes from a technical definition of what a church is. It's 2,500 members or larger, and has some characteristics of how it's formed. It comes from research. We've used it and picked it up as a label and used it as a club. Mega churches, they're bad, and then we want to dismiss them. We have about 12 mega churches in the Adventist Church. They're all around our Adventist educational institutions, our colleges, universities. Did you know in the 100 largest churches resides 51% of our membership? And they're around the Adventist colleges and academies, Adventist hospitals, other institutions. There are a few exceptions, few anomalies. But 51% of our membership in the Adventist Church is in the top 100, top meaning the total number of attendance membership. 100 churches. There are 6,000 Adventist churches meeting today. That means there's a ton of small churches. In fact, 51% of the churches today are smaller than this group gathered in this room. If that gives you perspective at all, it lets you know why that transition from school back to church may be difficult. Around these Adventist educational institutions, we have excellent preachers. That's not to ding anybody else who's a preacher. It's just to say, we watch the television programs of the people who preach at those churches, right? They're gifted preachers. God has given them a great ability. They have multiple pastors on a church staff at those churches. So they can do all kinds of programming. Their church budget's larger. Their tithe base is larger. The variety of music that they can provide is a wider range. And there are a variety of styles of music that are incorporated in these different churches. Right? And we all have our preferences. You know you do. Like you have what's the best food there is. And it differs from the person sitting next to you. Just like music. But the kids have that kind of array of resources and people, and there's a buzz around those places. There's good things taking place. And so we want them there. We want them to get a good education. We want them to find an Adventist who they'll spend their lives with. You get the idea. This is a great place. When they transition out, they get a job somewhere else, and they might go to a church with 15 people in it. And it's a huge adjustment. In fact, sometimes they can't make the adjustment. I've talked to plenty of physicians and dentists who went to Loma Linda University. There are about 30-some Adventist churches just within a couple of miles of that Adventist institution. And if those people can get off from the rotations that they have in the hospital or in the dental clinics or whatever else, and they can go to church, they have all these options. And then when they get done, they have a heart for serving underserved populations, and they move to rural America or Canada or any other place. And they walk into the local church, and it's as if they walked into the middle of a church in a foreign country. They can't understand the language. They can't understand the practices there. They have a couple of kids that they're holding the hands of, and they look around, and everybody's 70, 80, and 90 years old. And there is no children's programming. Right?
Yes.
And two things happen. People say, "Oh, what's your profession?" "I'm a physician." "Thank you, Jesus," they'll say. "Our financial woes are over." And B, what they say is, "We've had all the church jobs for years. Now here, it's your turn."
Burnout time.
Exactly right. And they load them up. And these physicians say, "I want to do something for the local church, but I'm not at home there in that place. I know they say that it's an Adventist church, but it's just a different world." And I just give that as an example. There are a variety of other examples. But you get the idea of what kind of a huge transition this is. And sometimes it's so daunting, they just kind of go, "I give up." And they watch church maybe somewhere, but they maybe don't go at all. When they leave church, they often leave. Leave school, they often leave the church. Now here's another reason why. Gone are the days when someone will move into a house or apartment or some place and they will go online now. It used to be they'd open the phone book, right? And say, "Where are the Adventist churches?" "Oh, okay. Well, that church is looks like about 3 miles from my house. Good, that's my new church home." Those days are pretty much gone. Proximity does not mean place and church home. What someone will do is come to a new location, then they'll start looking around to see, what is the personality of that congregation? Does it kind of mesh with what I'm looking for? Is it maybe something complementary and something I'd like to stretch to be or do? They're looking for a spiritual home, and they'll make that adjustment. Now, if there are 2 or 3 churches, that's pretty easy. But if they move to the greater Seattle area, they have dozens of churches from which to choose if they're willing to drive. And so it's a spiritual quest. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go there. And I'm going to go here and there. Now, you saw the statistics earlier, and that is if they're going maybe a couple of Sabbaths a month, and then they're going to Mountains Church one Sabbath, and then they're going to Beach Church another Sabbath, right?
Where's this church at?
Yeah, you want to know where it is. Yeah, sure, exactly. And then some people go to Bed Springs Church. You've been there, right? Yeah. After a while, they get overwhelmed because, let's see, what was that first church like?
The first one was Berrien Springs.
Berrien Springs. Yeah, that's right. Berrien Springs. Right. So it gets overwhelming, and they just give up trying to find a place. Because your church has a personality, right? It's different than another church. This idea that we do everything the same way in every Adventist church around the world is a myth. If you travel anywhere outside of this country, you'll see that in a heartbeat. Oh, there are a number of things that are similar, but not as much as we think. In fact, the General Conference Sabbath School Department will admit to you that not every church studies the same Sabbath school lesson around the world. And we used to claim that as the last bastion. Now, it's to say that there's a congregational personality, a spiritual home is what people are looking for, and so they're on this quest. It's just understandable why after a while they kind of give up, go, oh, this is way too overwhelming. It's really true now. With people who move at any age, this is a difficult time. Friends, we've got to watch when this happens. When our young people are coming out of school, going to their first job, this is a time in which they'll slip away. Let's be extra vigilant at those times. When people are moving, let's pay attention to those times and help them make that transition, because this is a potential time in which they'll kind of just slip away. Now, some of us say we don't want to impose, and we don't want to be too nosy and all of that sort of thing. Well, be appropriate. Yes, please. But say, can we do something that maybe would help? Walla Walla University started several years ago, and now several of our other Adventist universities have picked up this trend, and maybe you've been involved in it in your church. What they've done there is say, how can we help our graduating seniors? As they're moving to a new area, maybe we can introduce them to some of the alumni who are there in that area. Get acquainted with people. Maybe point them in the direction of some of the jobs that they might be interested in, if we can do that. Help them to locate good housing in that new area. They've done this. In addition, what they've done is say, there are several churches in the area which it looks like you'll be moving to. Can we just let them know you'll be there in the area, and they can make overtures to connect with you? Don't you like this? Builds a beautiful bridge. Several other Adventist universities are doing this. Let's encourage that. More of that needs to happen. A man told me, he said, I was being transferred in my work. And I was going from here to there. It was a sponsored move by the organization I was working with. And he said, my boss called me in and she said to me, she said, now here's what we made available to you to make the move. Here's going to be your new title and the new things you're going to do. Here's your revised salary package that's going up. Thank you for taking this move. Here's what we can do to help you move. Moving truck, so forth. transitional housing. And then she said, I took the liberty, and she pushed a paper across her desk toward him, and she said to him, I took the liberty to just grab a list here of the churches in your area where you're going to. I know how much your church means to you here. And so here's a list of those churches where you'll be going. I thought you might be interested. And he told me when I heard that, my jaw dropped. He says, you see, my boss is an atheist. She would chide us at work for being weak people if we were religious people. And she would give us all kinds of grief, but she knew that in a time of transition, our spiritual home was very important. And she had taken the time, maybe even delegated to somebody else, but maybe had taken the time herself. I don't have that detailed, the story. To take the time to put together that list. Friends, if an atheist boss can do that, surely we can in the church, can't we? Surely we can do that. Transition times are difficult times for people. They need their spiritual home. They need a place that will support them in it. We're seeing that people who are single have a hard time in our Adventist churches. These are often people who are past college age, but it can start in the college years. If you're single in the church, well, it can be difficult. We've got to fully admit to ourselves, friends, that churches are primarily for husband, wife, and children. And the other family members and older folk who are there in the church. The single adult whose young marriageable age is difficult for those folk. They report it this way. It's all right if you come around for a little bit, but if you're there on a more regular basis, what people start to say is, are you dating someone? Oh, you're not. Well, we have someone we'd like to introduce you to. And it's usually not a match made in heaven. Right? You should go to some of those singles events. Well, sometimes those are healthy places, and sometimes those are very dysfunctional places. And the single person is getting this clear message from we who are married. Until you are married and have a family, you really don't measure up in this congregation. Oh, we're subtle about it. But essentially, we want you to be like us, and then everything's fine. I mean, the couple that doesn't have children feels this too, as does many, many others. We want to say these sorts of things to confirm our choice. And we've made a good choice. But think about it from the single person's point of view. If we're communicating something to them that isn't really affirming, what we're doing is saying, well, you can hang around here, but we're really not going to see you as fully vested here until. And the poor single person feels it. Somebody who divorces feels it too. Is embarrassed by what happened, wished it hadn't happened that way, even if they knew they had been part of the breakup of the marriage. There's a lot of embarrassment and remorse. Some defiance, sometimes. There are a variety of responses. But now this person, once again, is single, right? What's fascinating is the research now shows we really don't do this a lot, but we still do it in some churches. We try to figure out, so who's the guilty party, right? And we want to take some action. Although now we ignore it, and I don't know which is worse. And what we do is we think, well, that person now will kind of move on because they were instigator of the trouble. And we want to keep the innocent party in our churches, but the research clearly shows that 73% of those who are the innocent party, I'm not sure who that is, because there were 2 in the marriage. But what happens is 73% of the innocent party leave within 12 months anyhow. They're single. They wished it hadn't happened the way it did. Now they're trying to kind of figure out what's their place. And so we lose them both. This prompts people to go. The research is also showing that the older men get, the less they attend church. That's why you see a lot of older women in church. But especially middle-aged men are starting to slip away from the church. We need to do more research to figure out exactly all the prompts. I know there are some great solutions that are taking place in churches, and here's what they tell me. They said, we've come to the realization that middle-aged men are often leaders in a local business. And they are managers of people, and they are in meetings all week long, and they say to us, we don't need to go to one more meeting, much less lead it. We want to be more active on the weekend. And so that's why they don't come to church. They're happy for the kids, for the wife, for anybody else who wants to go, and they're really not opposed. They just say, I just can't sit any longer. The other thing that churches are catching on to is that these men do want to give back in some way, and they see that the contribution they make needs to be a lot more active. I was overjoyed when the pastor told me this. The pastor said, we had built our church on a large piece of land. Fortunate to be able to get that kind of large piece of land in the suburban area where we are. And he said, we built the church, built adequate parking, had a fellowship hall and school there, and we still had land left over. It's great. He says, we're reading the papers, we're looking online, we see that the crying need of our community is for community gardens. Because you see, we live in a suburban area where there are planned neighborhoods, where the house is as large as the lot it's on. Right? The CC&Rs clearly say, don't grow your garden here. Don't do this and that and the other. And they're so restricted, they say, we want to get our hands in the soil and we can't do it at our home. We need community gardens. And I praise God for the fact that that church said, we have extra land, let's do a community garden right here. So they started putting the word out. Guess who the most active people were in helping to till up the land? I mean, they brought in the tractors and the tillers and all the equipment. And they got involved in growing the vegetables and the fruit on that land. It was the men who wouldn't come in to the meetings on Sabbath morning, but they got actively involved all week long in what was taking place in those community gardens. He said, the pastor told me, we fed the homeless shelter. We fed anybody who needed food. And he said, we had 4 tons of food left over. And he said it was our, quotes, inactive men in our church who made that happen. Friends, we've got to count it differently. This pastor said to me, I started to realize those men are active in the ministry of this church. They didn't come to prayer meeting. They didn't come to Sabbath school class. They might come to a church service now and then. And he said, we used to think, well, they're not active because they don't do those things. But when they did the gardens and they were involved in the ministry of the church that way, he said, it changed our attitude. It can change ours too, right? These are prompts that prompt people to go. There are rules over relationships that happen in churches that prompt people to go. We'll do it this way. There's no deviation. We've done it this way since Noah got off the ark. And we're not about to change, is what the church will say. And the rules are more important than the relationships with people. Now, I grant you, friends, relationships are messy. They're not easy. If everybody would keep the rules and stay lined up, it would be much easier. But it's all we have, relationships. I mean, if planet Earth had just enjoyed the Garden of Eden, everything would have been fine, right? So, some of you might be sitting here. I know in every group there is a group of people who say, now, Paul, I'll go with you a bit of the way here, but are you really saying we shouldn't have any rules? Let me be very clear, we ought to have some rules. There are things that we ought to agree on that help us, because when you get 2 or 3 people together, you've got to have some guidance for what you're going to do. That's important. I'm just asking you not to worship those rules. That to make them higher and better than the people for whom Christ died, those that you are there to minister to. Don't make your rules more important than the people. Be willing to flex a bit. Be willing to say, that's our best guiding principle, but we're going to apply it to you, and you, and you. And it's going to be different in each case. Churches that are most focused on rules over relationships are losing people fast. And I would have thought that in 19 years that I've been giving this message, and many other people are doing the same thing, that would be getting less. But I'm here to tell you, friends, there are some of our congregations where they're notching it up higher and higher. Perfection. And it's getting worse in some circles. Not better. I think we've got to get better in saying, we don't do that here. We've got to rise up. We're the silent majority, and we're letting the vocal minority run the church. And we've got to give that up. We've got to change that. So I would encourage us. We have got to get to the place where we speak up, we advocate for, and we say, it's people we're doing ministry with. If we worship our rules, I think it's upside down. Love people first. Well, people are leaving because of ethnocentrism. You acquainted with that term? Ethnocentrism. It's a sociological term which really interpreted is, it's just us and we're superior. Now, sociologists and anthropologists are realizing that it's really kind of the clanning that takes place, and we do that as families, we do that as groups, we do this on a regular basis, and it's often to confirm our choices. I mean, we believe we've evaluated something and we've come to a good conclusion, and that we want to kind of have that confirmed by other people around us. But ethnocentrism says that can get out of control. Here's an example. I heard about one church that says, sure, you can be a member here in our Adventist church. We just want to make sure that you eat a vegetarian diet. If you're going to be a member here, eat a vegetarian diet.
What if you're intolerant? We've got a guy in our church, he's intolerant to most of this stuff.
Yep.
That's kind of messed up.
And it was a big assumption because I think if you look at the data, there probably is the majority of the Adventists who don't even eat a vegetarian diet. Yep. But stay with my example. If you're going to be a member here, you got to eat a vegetarian diet. If you want to be a leader in this church, you've got to eat a vegan diet. You with me? You got to eat a vegan diet.
Wasn't nice knowing you.
It's not what they are telling you to do, it's that you have more of a choice.
Yeah.
You're not
Right.
accepted unless.
Right. Right. Ethnocentrism. You're making the point. Exactly.
It's undermining the free will.
Yep. So then somebody says, well, when you're asked, would you be an elder here in this church? Just what's it take to be an elder here? Well, you only can eat raw foods. You see how this is getting tightening? Is it getting tightened up?
Restrictive.
Yep. At which point the pastor says, and what do I eat?
Fast and pray, brother.
Exactly right.
You can become a breatharian.
A breatharian, exactly right. If a bug's going by, there's your protein. If you suck it in, and the nutrients in the air, ethnocentrism. And here's what happens. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And it comes down to, it's just us and we're superior. That's where it starts. And then it's just us and we're superior. Sorry, folks. It's just us. And then it's just us.
That's where you start.
And I'm starting to worry about you.
There's a lot of excluding going on.
And then here's the last step. It's just us. And I'm starting to wonder about you.
Didn't give away in that one.
Ethnocentrism. And there are many ways that we call this, and we do it in the church. And we start innocently by saying, we've made good choices and we're in this together, right? It can get out of hand. And it usually does. And that's why there are a lot of people that leave.
That's why the cross is so important. It's Christocentric.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Mm-hmm. So just understand that this is what prompts people to go. Prompts people to go. Here's another area. When people are making their faith their own, it's a big task. We would want people, before they reach the grave, to make their faith their own. It won't be mom and dad's faith. It won't be a favorite preacher's faith. It won't be a favorite teacher's faith. It won't be even their spouse's faith. They're going to follow what God is asking for him or for her to follow. Wouldn't we want that? But what if God takes you on a journey and there are some serious questions that you have, and you wonder why, and you ask that in a group and you watch people cringe? Because if it's difficult for the individual, it's really hard on the community of faith when people are making their faith their own. Sometimes it's an easy path for some. Others, it is a real difficult path. He grew up Adventist. Beautiful Hispanic home. Adventist home. Went to Adventist schools. Decided in college that God was calling him to be a pastor. And he decided that that's what he wanted to do, follow God's prompting. And so he took theology, went to the Adventist seminary at Andrews University, got his degree, went out to the local church. He and his wife were pastoring in a church, decided that this is about the time when they thought they'd like to start their family. So, God blessed, and they did their part, and a little one was starting to grow in her, and they were elated until that day in which, at the doctor's visit, the doctor said, "I don't hear a heartbeat anymore." And they said, God, why us? We're good Adventists. We pay our tithe. We eat a vegan diet. You know what I mean? We've done all these things right. With a lot of support from family and friends. I mean, there's more to the story, but you get the idea. There's more to the story. They really made it through this. They realized that people, there are many stories out there of pregnancies that the little one dies. They prayed that God would bless them again. Sometime later, twins. They're related. These died too. They were devastated. Parents were. And as he told me, he says, I kind of went back to the resources that I had and I started saying, God, why us? I read these promises, I look at what should give me courage, and I am not encouraged. It's going for a deep valley, right? And some of the answers that used to make sense in an area of structure that really fit well, and where a lot of our members are, it was not the place that was spiritually reassuring to him. A third pregnancy, the child went full term, died in birth. And he said, I give up. You're not listening. You're obviously not speaking. You're not intervening. I don't get it. This pastor said, I was going through a deep, deep valley. So was my wife. So was our church with us. And we had more questions than we had answers. Eventually, there was a live birth. But he went through making his faith his own. It wasn't somebody else's faith. It was, God, I cling to you, and some of the things that used to make sense didn't in that time, and now I'm coming out the other side a different person, more connected to you. But some of the glib answers that I got before didn't make sense while I was going through the deep valley, and now have a different meaning for me. Making our faith our own. We would want to do that. There are plenty of people who live their mom and dad's faith till the day they die. Many people who live the popular preacher's faith. Morris Venden comes to mind. A lot of people love to claim Morris Venden. A lot of people love to claim Graham Maxwell. Love to claim George Vandeman. Living somebody else's faith and not what God's pulling them, drawing them toward, but won't force them into it. When you make your faith your own, this is a daunting task. This is a whole seminar in itself, and we could spend a lot of time, but I think you get the idea. But if it's difficult for the individual, it's very difficult for the community of faith, because we don't like those kinds of questions. We don't like those kinds of sad stories that are ongoing. We love the 30-second commercial that you see the problem and the solution all in that 30 seconds. And making our faith our own and clinging to God. Well, this is challenging in our churches. But this prompts people to go. They don't feel like it really works there. Or they come to the place where they believe something differently than we might. Got to trust God with that, friends. It's the journey God has them on. Well, enough said for that. You may not have expected to see this on the list. We're noticing that a lot of people, if they have too many church responsibilities, are about an inch away from leaving the church. It's because our nominating committees are using the Buffalo Bill method of recruiting people. Somebody from the nominating committee rides in on a horse, lasso in hand, comes around, whoo, I got you. You can't say no, and they pull you in, and you have a church job, whether you're really gifted at it or not.
That's all it is a job.
Exactly. And it's out of our desperation that we get you involved. It's not where you're spiritually gifted and therefore motivated by God to do that job. You get the idea? And we overload the people who can't say no or seem to be talented. But just like the man whose family members were the whites, he had one too many jobs because he was very capable. Let's look to see who has too many church responsibilities and just do an inventory with them and say, what are your spiritual gifts? There are ways to determine that, right? Where are the abilities that you have? Where's God really calling you and you're following that calling? And where are things that we've placed that on you and it really isn't where you can give best to the church? And we need to find someone else who's gifted in that area because we'll all benefit by having more people involved. When we do that, we don't risk that someone with too many church responsibilities will start to pull away. No, that's not foolproof. You're going to get some who still go. But if we pay attention and say, I think we would honor you best by you doing X, Y, and Z. And the A, B, and C that we gave you, we're going to look for somebody else because they need the blessing of being involved and they're gifted at that. Do that gently, but do it well. Pay attention to those who have too many church responsibilities. They hit a perfect storm, too many anxiety-provoking events, and they'll say, well, everything I'm doing at church is voluntary. I can let that go. I've got to keep my job. I've got to, be a mom and dad. I've got to do it. And that stuff is voluntary. Prompts people to leave. We notice the people are leaving when the admired pastor leaves. And there's relational connections that take place with people, and we notice that they slip away. And the pastor gets moved to another district, another place, whenever these things take place. You've seen this happen, haven't you? Second and third generations. Where are we on time? We out of time? Quarter till. All right? We'll be done. The second and third generation of someone whose parents or grandparents were actively involved in the church, we notice a lot of them started to slip away. That's mom and dad's faith. That's mom and dad's church. That's my grandparents' place. That's a trend that we see not only Adventist Church, but all denominations. This is why all mainline denominations are dying. It's only those that aren't linked to a denomination that are growing right now, and they've started to plateau in the last several years. Right. So, second and third generations, they often say, that was a phase for somebody else in my family. It was a time period, and it may not be for me. What helps them re-engage is that they find a place where they can engage on today's terms, not the reasons of the past. Often it's in a new configuration of people doing some bit different things, maybe an enhanced set of beliefs, or maybe it is getting back to the original beliefs and not what we've made them to be. That prompts people to stay engaged in the church. This is especially true for our Caucasian congregations. It's now becoming true for African American congregations. Even some of our Hispanic churches are noticing this trend. It's for sure happening in lots of other culture groups. Did you know that 3 years ago we reached the tipping point in the Adventist Church? Caucasians are no longer the majority on Sabbath morning. 50% are Caucasian. The other 50% is a variety of others. Now, we're ahead of the curve as it relates to the census. About 2030, we're supposed to reach that point here in North America. So we're about 20 years or so ahead. 2010, that's what we saw. Now, what's true is it's an adjustment for we who are Caucasian who go to church on Sabbath morning, because we're still in the majority 6 days a week, right? By far. But when we go to church, we're now fast becoming the minority. And we don't know how to handle that.
California, that's really true.
Exactly. Northeast, it's really true. Texas, it's really true. Yep, exactly. We don't know how to handle it. Friends, I would encourage you to get acquainted with some people who are minority members of our society 6 days a week and just start asking them, so what's that like? What's it feel like?
Move to Hawaii sometime.
Yeah. Right. And learn from what you find out, because that day's happening. Second, third generations. Let me summarize. It's much easier to keep an active member than to try to reconnect with an inactive member. So some of this is what you're seeing this morning prompts you to pay attention to the people who are already there. Please do so. You really have the opportunity to keep a connection there. Now, I'm not saying doing that to exclusion of not connecting with the people who are away. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying pay attention to those that are around you. It's much easier to keep that connection. Now, please make the connections with the inactive members. It's well worth your time, and God's delighted as you do it. And you enjoy the joy of the journey. Some of you might be sitting here this morning and you have a case, a situation, a person you're thinking about, and you're saying to yourself, Paul, this is all well and good, but you haven't been through the fight we've been through with so-and-so recently. And he was so antagonistic. And we finally came to that board meeting where we had to make the agreement, we've got to part company. Are you saying to us, we've got to go back and try to re-engage with that person? Hear me carefully. I'm saying no. I believe that there are reasons why sometimes we do agree to part company. And there's plenty of space for all of us. So, the antagonistic person, the person we need to take some action on, I think that that's something that we need to do. Although that's a whole other seminar on how we do that. But what I'm suggesting to you is don't fixate on those one or two people that you might be thinking about. Think about all the other people, next point, who've been marginalized by the perfect storms of life, the anxiety-provoking events that have taken place. And say, you know, there are hundreds and thousands of those folk that we could give attention to first. And as God prompts us, we may re-engage with somebody that we've agreed, at least back then, to part company. The orchardists would call this, pay attention to the low-hanging fruit first. Before you say, we've got to get up on the ladder, we've got to get the fruit that's way up there at the top of the tree. Why go there first? Grab what you can as you're standing on the ground. Pay attention to those things first. And then remember. Remember you can't reach them all. If in perfect heaven, Lucifer decided to leave and take 1/3 of the angels with him. Can you fathom that? I can't get my head around that. I don't get it. That's my big question for God when we get to heaven. How did that happen? How did you let that happen? You know, grace. How does that happen? It's a mystery. At least to me.
And there's no record that any of those angels ever turned around before they first met.
We don't know. It's one of those things we'll solve in eternity, isn't it? But if God, in God's grace and understanding, would let that happen, we've got to let some people go. Breaks our hearts. Makes no intellectual sense. If we tried to argue with them until the day they died and the day we died, we'd never convince them. Let's let them make their choice. And please don't say, well, good riddance. Or any other words like that. Just, we allow people their choice. If in perfect, beautiful Eden, you know, there they were, Adam and Eve, freely took. We've got to allow people their choices. I married the girl next door. There's our picture. There she is. That's my sister. That's me and the dog. That's Terry's sister. She was 5 when we met. I was 7. Pretty much an arranged marriage by her parents. Yeah. Doesn't just happen in India. No. She was winking at me. See? You can see that. Bear with me. Terry grew up in a home where Dad left. And when he left the home, he left the church. There's a picture of the family here. This is Terry's dad, right in the middle. Terry's prayer from early on was, God be with Dad. Wherever he is, bring him back to you. For 4 decades, that was her prayer, and that of the family. 3 years ago, by God's grace, he came back. And some might look at that, friends, and say, 4 decades? That's an eternity. I think Terry would tell you it's just the right timing because it was God's timing. Don't give up. Don't give up. The prayer emphasis that we have here this weekend is the right focus. If you do nothing else in the area of reconnecting ministry, stay on your knees for those that you know that are on your list. That's the best thing you can do. And then if out of the research that you've seen and the hints that we have here that are presented, if you find there any ways that you can partner with God in bringing people back together again, use any of it you can. So for your children, for your nieces and nephews, for your family members, for some of you it might be your parents. For some of you it might be your work colleagues. Don't give up. This is on God's timing and God's way. We're just part of the conduit of God's grace. Keep praying. Keep loving. Keep drawing close. Keeping that connection. Well, this afternoon what we're going to do is we're going to tell you about what we've observed in churches that have really excelled in this area of reconnecting with our inactive members. And we'll just give you some hints of what they're doing, and you can say, well, that would work for us. That would work for us. And you can also say, that won't work for us. Because sometimes good leadership is knowing what won't work as much as what will work. Right? You need to right-size it for your congregation. That's what we're going to do. And then tomorrow morning, where we're going is this. I'm going to talk about how Jesus reconnected. And make the case, I hope, for you of an Adventism that offers people second chances. I have a story from this week where a church won't give somebody a second chance. It's happening now. It's not a day gone by. I mean, it's happening all the time. I want to make a case for the fact that if we're known as anything, we're known as a church that gives people second chances. So hang in with me, if you will. Come on back. Thank you for the time. Precious time together, huh? And hopefully the stories bring it home. Because reconnecting ministry is about people. And us getting back together again. God go with you.